Hello, everyone. It's Aunt Nikki of Your Story Hour. I hope you're all doing well today. It's time to read more of Sam Campbell's book, Too Much Salt and Pepper, Two Porcupines with Prickly Spines Who Make You Laugh and Think. And here's the crazy thing. We are reading chapter 13 today, and there's only 15 chapters in this book, so we're almost done. We started reading these because of the stay-at-home orders for most or many people because of COVID-19. And since most of that's lifted for the nation, we are going to take a break from reading. And we will see if or when or what or how things happen. But when we are done with this, Uncle John and I plan on chatting with everyone together when we're done with the book for a few minutes so you guys can hear our thoughts and what we've been doing. All right? But let's see what's happening today in chapter 13. Carol finds herself. Individual responsibility, nature's plan. There were 3 things demanding our attention when we awakened on the morning of Carol's 6th day at the sanctuary. First, the weather had made one of those quick changes characteristic of the North Country. The wind was whipping out of the north. Across the sky, clouds of gray with dark undersides were scurrying, looking like flocks of frightened sheep. We heard the wind whistling through our window screens before we were out of bed, and we knew it was a day for heavier clothes, stirring activity, hot soup, and great fires. Our next discovery was that Salt was gone again. The bread left out for him on the doorstep had not been touched, and the island had that empty feeling. Well might our neighbor start practicing with his whistle, and I might as well get ready for a hurry call just at the most inopportune time. It wouldn't be long before Salt would demand the accustomed ferry service, but our first 2 discoveries of the day were quickly forgotten in the third one. Carol was gone, too. She did not respond to our calls. Ginny hurried to her tent house. Everything was in good order, but Carol was very much absent. A note was pinned to her pillow, and Ginny brought it to me. "Gone to Vanishing Lake," it read in hurriedly written script. "Hope I see a bear. Don't wait breakfast for me, please. Love, Carol." "Should she have gone alone?" asked Ginny, a little concerned. "Do you suppose she can follow that trail?" "I would rather she hadn't gone," I replied, "for I know that though the wilderness will not hurt you, there are many ways to hurt yourself in the wilderness. However, that trail is quite plain, and she's been over it a number of times. If she doesn't return reasonably soon, we'll search for her." I went to the pier and found that Carol had taken a rowboat. On the mainland, I could see the boat at the shore where she had landed to take the trail. Time tries to be mean on occasions. When there is anxiety present, it likes to drag along. That is the way it seemed that morning. The few minutes we were straightening up the cabin and getting our breakfast seemed hours long. Continually we were looking towards the mainland, hoping to see Carol and her rowboat headed for the island. We called loudly, but the high wind just caught up our voices and swallowed them. It was blowing a gale now. Trees were bending low over the pressure of the wind, and across the lake marched legions of white-capped waves. Clouds charged along barely over the treetops, and there were brief showers of hard-driven cold rain. This was a typical North Woods day, the kind that gives character to the country. On such a day one feels the rigor of the wilderness, the power and wildness of it. There is a challenge in it. It dares the nature lover to come out, and when he responds it puts the color of health in his cheeks and brings to him a rugged happiness that is not possible in nature's milder moods. Normally we love this sort of challenging day, but with Carol alone in the forest and probably not properly dressed for such conditions, we were much concerned. We could wait no longer. It was time to begin the search. We packed some food and dry clothes in a pack-sack, and in our canoe crossed the now foaming waters to the mainland. Leaving the canoe on the shore near Carol's boat, we walked at a stiff pace down Vanishing Lake trail. "If only she didn't get frightened," I said as we hurried along. "Nothing will harm her unless she loses her head. "And we must not get frightened for her," cautioned Jenny, noting my mounting concern. I smiled and slackened my pace, which had become almost a run. Certainly, this was a time for clear and calm thinking. "Thanks," I said, though I was finding it far easier to be unafraid about myself than it was about someone else. Many times I had been in the forest, not knowing just where I was. The thought of fear had never come to me, for I knew, well, nothing in the woods would harm me, and I knew I would figure out my problem sooner or later. In fact, I have always found a large measure of genuine pleasure in being lost. There is something of the contest in the circumstances, and it gives a feeling of intimacy with the forest. But to think of Carol, who was new to the woods out there alone, on this kind of a day was taxing my composure. Vanishing Lake Trail offered no evidence that Carol had been over it. The intermittent showers of rain had washed away any tracks that might have been there. We called continually, but our voices were muted by the roar of the wind. Trees were lashing back and forth now, and occasionally we could hear a crash as one of them, unable to stand the strain, fell to the ground. Carol was not at Vanishing Lake, and there was no evidence that she had been there. The little spruce trees along the shore were bending gently in the gale, and the small lake was staging a sort of toy-like storm of its own. High overhead, 2 eagles were having a grand time riding the wind. How we wished that we might have their wings for a few minutes to rise and look about the country. It was a futile feeling that confronted us. We could not see, shout, or hear beyond range of a few yards. Carol might well have just been over the next ridge, and we could not have found her, nor could she have known of our presence. "Look there. There are the eagles." But there was nothing to do but keep searching, small as was the area we could observe. We took up each one-side trail, climbed hill over hill, hill after hill, shouting until we were hoarse, but all we heard was the voice of the wind. Hour after hour went by, and our search continued. There was a growing seriousness to the situation that we could not deny. Darkness would be coming all too soon. We needed help at once if Carol was to be saved from spending a night in the woods. 2 of us were not enough to search effectively over such a vast territory. The forest rangers must be notified and a searching party organized. We returned over Vanishing Lake Trail to our canoe and then to the cabin. To reach the ranger's station, we must cross a long stretch of rough water to the place where our car was stored, and then drive 7 miles over a forest road. An axe must be taken along, for it was very possible that trees might have blown down across the road. Before beginning this journey, I changed to dry clothes and made ready for long hours in the forest. Rain had ceased for the time, but the wild wind blew stronger than ever. Poor Carol! Of all days in the year she should have been lost on this one. I had left the cabin to begin my journey alone. Ginny remained to receive Carol in case the child succeeded in returning by herself. As I walked towards the pier, I heard a tiny sound that suggested a squeak of some distant gate. I called to Ginny to help me listen. Even above the gale, we heard the sound again. No question about it. There was something in the air other than the many voices of the wind, and it wasn't a squeak of a gate. Fweet, 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 came the unwelcome but commanding whistle from my neighbor's cabin. "Oh, no!" cried Jenny. "Not that! At a time like this, Salt can wait this once." But the whistle insisted. Fweet, fweet, fweet. And then it gave a series of short, quick toots that certainly indicated a desperate state of affairs. Surely the language of that whistle was such as demanded response. "I'll have to go," I said resignedly. "I can do it quickly, but what do you suppose that porcupine has done now? Probably chewed the back door off their cabin, or maybe he has eaten his way right down through the roof." While the insistent whistle continued its commanding message, I got into a boat and rowed over hill after hill of high waves. I was so busy at the oars I seldom looked around, knowing well the course to my neighbor's pier. As I neared shore, where I was protected somewhat from the wind, I heard the expected honk, 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 honk. I answered back in porcupine language. Again came the honk, 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 but this time it was followed by an outburst of merry laughter. Now, Salt can do many things that surprise me, but he couldn't do that. I turned quickly in my seat to find Carol standing there, buried deeply in the folds of a much oversized raincoat. Honk, 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 she was calling along with laughter. I'll bet I look like a porcupine at that. My own joy at seeing her could not be restrained. Standing up in the boat and beating my breasts in Tarzan fashion, I gave the old North Woods war whoop, which is reserved for such exultant moments. Wahoo! The sound bounded down the shores, even over the roar of the wind. Ginny heard it, and with the aid of the binoculars learned what was happening. Carol, you blessed child! I exclaimed with what breath I had left. How in the world did you get here? She came out of the woods, my neighbor was calling from his half-open door. Just the way the pesty porky comes. And if you would just as soon, we would much rather she keep coming than he. She doesn't chew our door still, and she doesn't scratch on the screen. They were so nice to me, Carol was saying as we got in the boat and rowed away. They took me in before their fire and cooked a hot lunch for me. I don't blame Salt for liking to go there. Carol looked about as beraggled as when I had fished her out of the lake on her all too numerous dunkings. Her hair was twisted about like tangled ropes, and her clothes, somewhat dried by her neighbor's fire, were a nondescript pattern of wrinkles and mud. But, Carol, I said, much puzzled, how did you get there? That is a long way away from Vanishing Lake. There are swamps and no trails that lead that way. It was too windy to carry on much conversation as we crossed the lake, and our reunion was too joyous and noisy for explanation immediately. However, in the course of time, we got Carol's version of her experience. She had followed the trail to Vanishing Lake all right, going out just about dawn. There hadn't been much wind when she had started, just enough to make the forest talk mysteriously. She had seen several rabbits as she hiked along. There was a porcupine in a tree, and she had called to it, hoping it might be Inky or perhaps the long-missing Pepper. Lost my place. But she had received no response. There was a deer drinking at Vanishing Lake, and of course this must be Babette, she insisted. And there was a long little animal, built like a dachshund, that darted the length of a fallen log not 10 feet away from her. A weasel, Carol, I said. It was a cute weasel, then, insisted Carol. The creature had paused for just a moment and looked at her in rather friendly manner before he disappeared in the brush. But beautiful as was the experience, she had begun thinking of breakfast. She ate some malted milk tablets she had brought along, but they were an unsatisfactory substitute for bacon and eggs, or perhaps Ginny's special pancakes. She rose to return to the cabin, but decided to take another trail. Another trail? I questioned. Why, Carol, there isn't another trail. But I found one, she declared. It was a small one and wound around a lot, but I could follow it, at least for a way. Carol, Carol, Carol. That was a deer trail. Yes, a deer trail. These animals have their paths through the forest, and for generations they go over the same route. Their tiny hooves wear a deep rut, and the trail becomes as well defined as if it was made by human feet. However, it is well not to follow their paths, for deer do not necessarily wish to go where we do, so their trails may well lead us astray. That is just what this one did, agreed Carol, her eyes dancing with excitement at recalling the adventure. It circled around hillsides, and sometimes there were several branches. I always took the one that seemed the most used. Carol had followed the trail without knowing what direction it was taking, until she found herself on the margin of a tangled swamp. The trail was quickly lost in crisscrossed logs, mud, moss, and massed cedar trees. She realized she could not get through, so she turned about and went back to the top of a little hill. and there sat on a comfortable log to think things out. From here she could see beyond the swamp. She decided to circle the swamp on the highland and picked up the trail on the other side. Pick up the trail on the other side. It took her some time to do this, but really longer than she had figured. But at last she came upon a well-defined trail again. Then suddenly she realized she was standing beside the very log on which she had been resting before she started this maneuver. She had circled the swamp completely without finding another trail, and had last returned to her starting place. Then for a few moments she felt frightened. The realization came that she was lost. Now the first rain was falling, and she had brought along only a light jacket. The wind was increasing, and she said the whole woods were saying "boo" at her. She had been wanting to see a bear, now she was afraid she would see one, and she confessed that there were a few tears flowing. "But I tried to remember all you have taught me," she said. The adventure was all joy now. "I remembered that there wasn't anything in the woods that would hurt me. I remembered that you said we must learn to be quiet, and I sat right there and prayed until I felt all calm inside. Something happened within me. Carol paused for a moment as if seeking a way to explain something that was hard to put into words. But she brushed past the matter, declaring that she wasn't afraid any more. She started to figure things out. She declared over and over again that she could solve that problem. She recalled that Vanishing Lake was west of the cabin. Therefore, if she went east, she would come to the shore of our lake. But which way was east? There was no sun to give her the slightest hint. She tried to recall some of the woodcraft stunts she had read in other books, outdoor books. There was something about moss growing on the north side of the tree, but when she looked at the trees near her, the moss was even all around. Just as well she hadn't trusted that one. Like most of the storybook woodcraft, this sign is unreliable. On the south side of a hill, where there are few trees and the sun can shine on their trunks, the moss will grow thickest on the north side of the trees, since it likes shade. But conditions make this undependable. Only one sign Carol could have relied upon had she known it. The topmost branch of an uninjured hemlock tree points east. But one must know a hemlock tree and must be sure it is uninjured before one can trust the pointed finger. If the sun were shining, she might have pointed the hour hand of her watch towards the sun. Halfway between the hour hand and the shortest distance to 12 o'clock would have been approximately south. But Carol had figured out something that was of greatest help under the prevailing circumstances. It occurred to her that she had been walking back to Vanishing Lake. The wind was striking her right side. Hence, if she walked now so that it struck her left side all the way, she would be retracing her steps. She adopted this course and held to it. "Fine thinking, Carol," I complimented her. "Excellently done. You were fortunate that the wind didn't change, though." She realized this, but felt certain such a strong wind would not change suddenly. From then on, her story was one of travel difficulties. She had continued on her wind-directed course regardless of obstacles. Sometimes she was in swamps, sometimes in dense brush-filled areas, sometimes among tall pines where the walking was relatively easy. She remembered the caution against hurry and walked at an even pace, resting when tired. Several times she had stopped to call, but realized her voice would not carry far. Finally, she came to the shore of the lake not far from our neighbor's cabin. "And do you know," she said, still quivering with excitement of her adventure, "I was just a little bit sorry when I found out where I was. It had been grand working it all out, and—" Again she paused for want of words. For a moment her eyes became distant and her lips relaxed in a strong smile. I felt as if there was something very vital in her story which we were not getting. This child had had an adventure deeply impressive and with an edge of danger to it. She hadn't just blundered through it, she had thought her way through it. Great things happened in people in times like this. "Carol," I said, "do you remember what thoughts came to you when you sat on that hill? I mean, just before you got the idea of letting the wind guide you back. Was there something that impressed you a great deal?" Carol flashed a look at me that was almost reluctant. The smile died from her lips, but there was an expression in her eyes that was rich with deep feeling. "Yes," she said, but again she hesitated. "Can you tell us?" asked Ginny, drawing her chair nearer and taking the child's hand in hers. "I wonder if I can," said Carol. We sat in silence as she tested her thoughts and searched for a way to express them. "You see," let me shift. "When I first realized I was lost, I felt pretty helpless," she said. "Always I had had someone to ask about problems, someone to figure them out. But now there was no one. I told you I prayed long and hard. Then for a few moments I just sat there and quietly looked around. A strange feeling crept over me. I realized I wasn't the only one that was lost. Some part of all of those who loved me was lost too. You people, my parents, my friends. If anything happened to me, it would hurt everyone. I shouldn't have gone alone on that trail. I knew it. It wasn't fair to you, and I knew I had to get out of the woods, not only because of myself, but because of everyone. I felt responsible, I suggested. That's it. I felt responsible. I simply had to win. I prayed some more, and while I was praying, the last bit of fear left me. It was the strangest feeling. I knew that I was all right, and that I could do the right thing. I was so sure of it I laughed at the rain as it beat in my face. When the wind blew hard, I dared it to blow harder, and it seemed to me—" She hesitated again and bit her lip. "You won't laugh at me, will you?" she asked. "Of course not," I assured her. "We are grateful if you will share your experience fully with us. We are learning something by this." "Well," she continued, "it seemed to me that this wasn't being lost at all. I actually felt as if I had been lost all my life, and this experience was finding myself. I was directly in touch with real things. There was no one else to turn to solve things for me, and I was dealing with nature firsthand. Do you know what I mean?" We knew very well what she meant. Who has not stood in that glorious moment when it seems that God himself has called him by name and directed him to do an important task? "It seemed to me," Carol was saying, "that there was no more important thing in the world to be done than for me to get out of that woods. And what made me happy was that I was the only one who could do it. It was my job. I just knew I could do it. And now," she gave a delighted little laugh, "now I know I can do anything that God asks you to do." Jenny finished the sentence to Carol's satisfaction. And so, Carol, in your hours in the wood, trying though they may have seemed, you saw that great truth which all nature reflects, and which we must all understand. It is individual responsibility. Nature grows, evolves on that plan. Here about us lies the great forest, useful, beautiful, a boon to the whole earth. But it was only a good forest because every tree in it was being the finest tree that could grow there. Every tree and shrub was giving its all to growing. Nature would accept no less. No tree could wait upon its neighbor. It could not say, "If others will grow, I will too, otherwise I won't." Nature works on the perfection of the individual. And because each tree was doing its best, accepting full responsibility for living, doing, and growing, with all its power, the forest is strong and beautiful. Nothing that lives is excused from this law of nature. Every creature is being the best one of his kind that he can be. He is solving his problems, arising to conditions. Even the common grass blade or the lowly dandelion is forever devoting all its power to growth, being the best plant of its kind that could grow where it grows. This is the principle on which the universe is built. Evening came early. The wind moderated somewhat, but still blew at a lively pace through the gathering darkness, playing a strong symphony on the pines. Daytime clouds broke their solid array, and soon stars were peeking between their dark forms. The moon rose and plated the fluffier one with silver. Fluffier ones, there we go. The fluffier ones with silver. The day had been filled with so much thought that Carol felt we should see wise old Inky before bedtime. We paddled to the mainland accordingly and started towards the salt lick, but long before we reached it, Inky's roam, we came upon a good-sized porcupine in the middle of our trail. This creature was not in the least disturbed by our presence or our inquisitive flashlight. Obviously, it was not large enough to be old Inky, yet it showed definite interest in us. Ginny gave the little porcupine call. The animal answered. "Do you suppose it is Pepper?" asked Ginny excitedly, and she continued calling the porky in its own language. The creature answered again. It raised on its hind feet and shook out all its quills. Then, with a sudden abandon, it began whirling about in a dance of toughness. "It is Pepper!" cried Ginny, as the three of us moved forward towards the happy creature. And then it made a move that removed all doubt. Breaking out of its whirling dance, it made a dash for me, wrapped all 4 feet around my leg, and bit sharply into my knee. That was Pepper's old stunt. A wild porcupine would never do that. This was our pet, who had now been absent for over 3 months. At the cost of half a dozen quills embedded in my hand, I took the enthusiastic animal from my leg and tussled with her about on the ground. She always had been tough and rough in her play, and her long life in the woods had not made her any more gentle. For a few minutes we had a right lively time, keeping her over cordial and affectionate greetings from scarring us for life. Then she literally danced her way off into the dark brush, as if to say she was glad to see a little of us, but didn't want too much. The 3 of us stood laughing and calling after her for some time. It was good to know for certain that she was still around and had not forgotten us. We moved on to the salt lick. The cake of salt was worn now, and the stump below it was deeply cut by Inky's persistent chewing, aided no doubt by Pepper, perhaps Salt, and other porky visitors. We had not long to wait for Inky that night. We heard his little grunt of greeting back in the forest in response to our call. It had been several nights since we had visited him, and perhaps he was just a little bit lonesome. However, he always acted as self-sufficient and utterly indifferent to us that it was difficult to know whether we were very important to him or not. Now he appeared in the rays of our flashlight, walking along with his head to the ground as if his great load of quills were about all he could carry. "Inky knows individual responsibility, doesn't he?" said Carol, her own experience still vivid in her thoughts. "Bet he didn't have to get lost to learn it either." Inky was close to our feet by this time. He took the cookie Carol offered him, although he always had a way of taking such things that made us think he was doing us the favor. He ate a few bites of the delicacy, and then with utter disdain dropped the rest on the ground and stood looking up at us. Carol stooped and stroked his head. He tried to make a playful bite at her hand, but she had learned well how to avoid him. "I believe he will talk tonight," said Carol with a wink at me. "He just looks like it." Yes, Inky looked as if he would talk. Perhaps it was because we knew noise is so empty and meaningless that we believe everything silent is made up of deeper wisdom. Inky was double silent that night. He did not indulge in his little grunts, and he did not dance. He just sat there looking at us, blinking a bit in the light, and occasionally scratching an itchy spot with either fore or hind foot. I sat on the ground before him, and he came forward and put his front feet in my lap, and then with a little groan of relaxation, he lay down contentedly. "Is he talking now?" asked Carol, tempting me. Ginny and I can't hear away over here." "Well," I said, "if you can't hear him, then he is talking." I looked down at the old porcupine's face, wishing I could give up to repose as easily and as completely as he did. Inky yawned cavernously, started to stretch back out one ear, and then gave it up as too much trouble. "Sammy, old boy," he seemed to be saying, "I want to add a bit to the things you've been learning today." "All right, Inky, go ahead. We'll just skip the questions as to how you know we were learning anything. This business of individual responsibility, he paused and looked up to see if I were impressed by his use of such enormous words. This individual responsibility has got a catch to it where you people are concerned. Your job is a bit bigger than ours. We forest people don't have any choice. We just have to obey the law. Every last one of us has got to be the best one he can all the time. We don't know anything else. Same is true of plants and trees. They just have to keep growing their best, and there isn't anything inside of them that says, "What do you want to do that for? Why should you do anything that is right when maybe others won't be doing their part?" There is where you humans beings are handicapped. You've got a funny ability to doubt and to make choices. Most all of you really know that what you ought to do live under the same law as the forest. You would have a mighty swell world if each one of you would just be the fine fellow you can be. But there you start doubting and questioning. You think that is so blamed smart, and yet is your biggest problem. You won't want us to stop reasoning things out, would you, Inky? I put in. No, I didn't mean that. Inky changed his position. Yawned. Again, I shouldn't have pretend yawned because I started a real yawn. It's good to reason things out, but you folks don't always reason. You just fear. When the little old voice of wisdom says inside you, "You gotta be the finest human being you can be," you say, "Well, okay, but what about the rest of those folks? If I follow that pattern and the others don't, they will take advantage of me." And you all go along, doing lots that is wrong while you believe you should do what is right if everyone would. Now, Sammy, the world doesn't work that way. Take that old hemlock tree of mine, for instance. If it was the only tree in the world, it would still be the best tree it knows how. If you could take all the rest of the trees away, and sometimes it looks as if you people mean to do just that, it wouldn't get mad, resentful, mean, or just quit trying. It would keep on growing as if the whole world depended upon it alone. Now that is what you call individual responsibility, I suggested. Thanks, said Inky. I just wanted to see if you knew. Inky rose, shook out his quills, and looked into the darkness. I knew his moves. Our visit was about over. He raised on his hind feet and reached up with his twitching nose. Carol offered him another cookie, but he wasn't interested. He hadn't quite finished his silent oration. "Listen, folks," he said, though I am sure Ginny and Carol did not hear him, as they were listening to some sound out in the forest. "You people are kind of pathetic. You want to be rid of your troubles, your politics, poverties, wars, and such things. You try one thing after the other that doesn't work, when your only way is nature's way. A long time ago, someone said as much to you, and you didn't listen. Something about doing your own work, minding your own business, or something about salvation. Work out your own salvation?" I helped Inky out. "For to this end God worketh with you? By balsam juice, that's the one. Boy, if you'd only learn to do that, you'd straighten yourself out in a hurry. We forest folks have known that for ages. Boy, oh boy, it's a swell world when everyone can work out his own salvation." Can work out his own starvation. Salvation, Inky, I corrected. "Okay, whatever you call it, it's a swell world when everyone can get busy at that business of finding his own happiness, and that way help others to find theirs. That reminds me, I didn't do a very good job of chewing on that cedar tree today. Gotta get busy. So long." And with sudden animation, he went scampering into the forest. "Wish I had listened more closely," said Carol as I repeated Inky's conversation on the way home. "He said something when he says you can be happy in working out your own salvation, for I had a wonderful time today working out mine. And that's the end of chapter. So we look forward to you guys coming and listening to the last couple of chapters of this book. And remember, this is our 5th book that we've been reading to you, so you can always go back and listen to the other stories time and time again, because I know I love listening to stories over and over. Thanks for hanging out today. See you later.